Welcome back to the channel. Today I've got a really special guitar for you and one of my favorites, a 1951 Fender NoCaster. But in order to understand this guitar and why it's so special, we need to go back in time a little bit to 1949 to look at a sequence of events that would eventually give birth to what is now known as the NoCaster. But before we do that, I want to talk about a guy named Don Randall. Don Randall was Leo Fender's general manager and oversaw sales for the company. Don Randall, in my opinion, was just as important to the legacy of Fender and Fender guitars being what they are today as Leo Fender himself. Don Randall believed deeply in Leo's vision, and he was also the guy that helped keep Leo on track and on task. Leo was a builder. He was a problem solver, he was an innovator, but what he was not was a guy that liked to keep deadlines or timelines or any of that sort of thing. He liked to build, and he liked to create, and he liked to make things as perfect as he could get them, which is great. It's why we have these fantastic guitars today, and why many people believed that Leo got it right the first time. I am one of those people as well. Don was the guy that helped Leo realize his vision. He was the guy that had his eyes on the field and saw what other companies like Gibson and Gretsch were doing at the time. Before I do that, I want to tell you a really quick story about Leo and about Don Randall. When Fender guitars sold to CBS in 1965, Leo's portion of that sale was roughly $5.7 million. And in today's dollars, that's about $57 million. When that happened, Leo was in the middle of developing something, and he couldn't be bothered to go to New York to pick up his check for $5.7 million. So instead, he sent Don Randall, who picked up his check and deposited it into his account. Pretty cool. P.S. Don Randall, his cut was about $5.5 million from that sale, roughly $55 million in today's money. Not bad. In April of 1950, Leo Fender announced to the world the Fender Esquire. It was painted black. And the reason for that was because the wood he used had so many imperfections, he didn't want anyone to see it, and nothing better than black will cover up imperfections. The number of those made isn't quite known, but I've heard around 24 of these guitars were made, and they were mainly considered samples or prototypes, given to salespeople and given to certain artists in the area to test out. The price on these prototype Esquires was $139.99. The first Esquire had one pickup. However, Don Randall in 1949 had put into Leo's head the idea of having a guitar with two pickups. The reason being, Don was looking around the landscape in the country at the time and saw that Gibson had guitars with two pickups and even three pickups, so he wanted to make sure that Fender could compete. While the first Esquire had one pickup, it also had a route for what would eventually be a neck or rhythm pickup. That cavity would be covered up by a pickguard until the summer of 1950, when Leo went into full production of two pickup Esquires. He was so excited about these two pickup Esquires that he put on pause the one pickup Esquire. What he was most excited about was what you could do tonally by having two pickups. So let's talk about this pickup configuration and controls, because it's super interesting the way that Leo originally laid this out. So in this position right here, you have access to the bridge pickup, and you also have access to roll in the neck or rhythm pickup. This was not a tone control. In the middle position, you have access only to the rhythm position, no tone control at all, because this actually never was. In this position, you have access to the rhythm position, but you engage a capacitor that cuts off all of the highs, thereby creating a very low or deep rhythm position for the guitar. Some people call that the mud switch. Some people call it completely useless. Either way, Leo did this because he thought that guitar players were going to play bass lines in a band. Here's the thing about Leo. He was not a guitar player, but he wanted to think of everything and give players every option, at least as best as he could. Gotta love it. During the summer of 1950, NAMM was held here in Chicago at the Palmer House. Don Randall attended that convention, and he was super excited because he had, in hand, two Fender Esquires to show off to both players and to dealers. Now, back then, conventions were huge. because a salesperson could do as many sales as they would in 3 months of being on the road, but they could do it in 3 days. Because remember, there was no internet. If you wanted to sell guitars, you had to travel the country, travel your territory, and show buyers the newest, latest, and greatest build from your company. Don gave the guitars to players, and he also gave them to dealers, and the feedback was very positive. People seemed to really like the guitars. Don wasn't too happy about the setup, but they were good enough to at least get by the first or second day of NAMM. But by day 3 and on, those 2 samples had already backbowed and the necks began to warp. He freaked out, and rightfully so. He sent letters to the company urging them to get Leo on track, to make Leo put a truss rod in these necks, because he did not want to put a product out there that was going to be faulty or one that players wouldn't want to play, because he knew how important it was for Fender to get it right the first time. This is another example of why Don Randall was so incredibly important. If it weren't for Don, would Leo have ever used truss rods? Perhaps. Perhaps he would have. But the thing about Leo is that Leo had a lot of pride. He was a little resentful that Don would suggest that his necks wouldn't withstand the test of time. He believed that his hard rock maple neck, the same one used to make dance floors and bowling balls, would withstand any kind of warping and certainly wouldn't twist. As a matter of fact, there's a really famous and cool photograph of 2 chairs, and bridged between those chairs is a Fender neck and an employee standing on top, proving that these necks were indestructible. Leo also believed that in the rare circumstance or rare situation where your neck did twist or warp or whatever happened, he would simply send you a new one in the mail. He also believed that if your frets got low, he would simply send you a brand new neck. Leo, again, was not a player. He did not understand that we as guitar players love our necks. The neck is the thing. If you find the right neck, that's like finding the right baseball glove. And especially if you wear that baseball glove in, that's your glove. It's your neck. Leo didn't understand that. What he did understand was that after having a few Esquires on his bench over the course of a few days and watching those necks twist and warp, a truss rod was absolutely necessary. Did you know that Don Randall is the guy that named the Fender Esquire the Esquire? Pretty cool. Leo loved the name so much because he thought it was regal and did the guitar justice. Well, by the end of 1950, Don got his wish, and all guitars from that point forward would have truss rods. And it was around this time that Don changed the name of the Esquire to the Broadcaster. Gretsch had a drum kit called the Broadcaster. It was spelled a little differently. The C was replaced with a K for caster, different from Fender, which used a C for caster. Nonetheless, it was close enough to their trademark that they sent a cease and desist letter to Fender right away. And this is what I love so much about this era and this time. Leo Fender and Don Randall, instead of putting up a fuss, their response to Gretsch was absolutely, "We are so sorry, we had no idea. We will stop using the name Broadcaster right away." The cease and desist letter arrived to Fender on February 20th of 1951. On February 23rd of 1951, Fender apologized and told Gretsch they would stop using the name Broadcaster. And on February 24th of 1951, Don Randall, who named the Esquire, the Broadcaster, changed the name of the Broadcaster to the Telecaster. So, how did Fender handle the issue with the Broadcasters that were out there and with all of those Broadcaster decals that they had already printed up? With a pair of scissors, of course. Instead of throwing them away, Leo Fender, being a utilitarian guy, being a guy who didn't want to waste, being a guy who was a problem solver, simply cut the word Broadcaster off of the Fender logo, thereby leaving only the name Fender, thereby giving birth to what we now call the NoCaster, which is this guitar that I'm holding in my hands right now. How cool is that? The NoCaster existed only for a few months. By the time summer rolled around in 1951, the Telecaster was off to the races. But this guitar bridged that gap between broadcaster and Telecaster. And it's one of the most collectible guitars out there because of the history and because of the story and because of the way that Leo and Fender decided to solve the problem of this trademark infringement. It's such a cool guitar, and I love the story of it. So let's talk about this 1951 NoCaster. This is currently on consignment from one of our very, very close artist friends. I'm not going to tell you who they are, but I can assure you, you are very aware of this person's bands, plural. This guitar was purchased and used as a tool because it sounds undeniable. This bridge pickup is pure magic. It is the reason that people covet and love these guitars so much. Nearly all original with the exception of the neck pickup having been rewound, but the magnets and the bobbin are all original. And some solder joints have been touched up. Presumably they did that while they were in rewinding the pickup. But let's talk about a rewound pickup. Some people freak out about that. It is not a big deal. I'm just going to say it again. It's not a big deal. It does not disturb the integrity of this guitar, of this pickup. Because if you think about it, this guitar is 74 years old. At some point, some things are going to have to be fixed in order for it to sound great. If the intention is to hang it on a wall and use it as an art piece, which is fine, some people do that, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it because this is actually a piece of art, and you need something to be totally original, I can understand it. But if you want to play the guitar and you really want it to work, you're going to have to do that. And honestly, Leo Fender would have done that. Remember, Leo believed that if your frets got low, take the neck off, throw it away, I'll send you a new one. That was his philosophy. He wanted it to be modular. So I think Leo would approve and wouldn't see it as a big deal. Before I end, I want to give a very, very special thank you to Richard Smith, who authored the book Fender, The Sound Heard Round the World. That book has been more than a study guide for this video. It's been a companion of mine for many, many years. I absolutely love that book, and I'm going to be totally honest with you, I have cried reading that book. Absolutely have. And the reason for that is that Richard Smith does such a great job of telling you about the people. He does such a great job of trying to show you the mind and humanity of Leo Fender, of Don Randall, of the other people that were involved in the history of Fender guitars. And it's because of that that I feel I'm able to really understand, as much as I can, what was going on in the 50s and why Leo or Don may have or may not have done what they did. I really thank you, Richard Smith, so very much for that book. I love it dearly. I also want to thank Nacho Banos for the beautiful book, The Blackguard. If you haven't seen this book, oh wow, go check it out. Rumor is it's extremely expensive, but it's worth the money. It is a beautiful, thick book with beautiful Blackguards, beautiful Telecasters, Esquires, NoCasters. Super helpful book in understanding this particular guitar because not all broadcasters were the same. Some had pencil dates on the neck, some didn't. There were a lot of things that were inconsistent, and that's what's so great about this era of guitar making. They were just figuring it out. Nothing was set in stone. Nothing was totally concrete or permanent. They were getting their sea legs, which is why you see some differences from one NoCaster to another NoCaster or one Telecaster to another Telecaster. That book was extraordinarily helpful, and it's so beautiful. I hope this was helpful. I hope it was educational. I had a blast learning more about this specific guitar, but more importantly, learning more about what gave birth to this guitar. It's a magical build. I have so much admiration for Leo Fender, so much admiration for Don Randall, and what Fender did for the music instrument world, because they did indeed change the world, and Leo Fender absolutely got it right the first time. Thank you so much for watching. And don't forget, make something, say something. Be well.